Um, but yeah, so I am a missionary associate headed to Kenya. I come from Erie, Pennsylvania, and I have slides. I told Pastor, I was like, sometimes like the churches don't always get my slides right, and so I'm always kind of excited when it works. But yeah, I grew up in Erie, Pennsylvania. I have 5 siblings. Here's us. I think it was not last Easter, but the Easter before that. We all dressed in black. It was very, I don't choose the colors. But we were all homeschooled, and I use that as an excuse in my life. If there's anything wrong with me, it's because I was homeschooled. So, and my brothers did baseball, and my sister and I did dance classes, and even my one brother does scuba diving, which I think is quite fun. But yeah, ever since I was probably 7 years old, I always knew I wanted to be a missionary. It was just dead set. I was always, you know how you ask little kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a missionary. And actually, I always said I wanted to go to India. And you're saying, wait a second, you said Kenya you're going to. I'll explain. I always said when I was a kid that I wanted to go to India. And so I started doing mission work when I was 13, pretty much as early as I could. And I went on my first international missions trip when I was 15. And I have just been in love with it ever since. And upon graduating high school, I thought it'd be good to have a bit of a side job. I knew I wanted to do mission work, but even Paul had tent making he could fall back on. So I went into nursing school. And I was about 6 months into nursing school when my school and I had a bit of a moral disagreement. They wanted me to do something that I wasn't comfortable with, and I said no, and they said yes, and I said no, and then they kicked me out. So I believe it was January of 2022, and I felt like my whole world was just flipped upside down, and I didn't know what to do. And so I went to my pastor. I said, what do I do? And she said, Katie, if you were my daughter, I'd tell you to get out. You're not meant for little Erie, Pennsylvania. Go do mission work. Go do what you're meant to do. So I took that to my prayer group, and I was like, well, what do I do? Can you pray with me? Can we figure this out? And the woman who leads the prayer group just so happens to be an Indian woman. She said, let me get back to you. Now, this is a little confusing. She got in touch with one of her friends that also was Indian. Her friend's parents, who live in India still, they go to the same church as a man who runs a children's home. Now, the children's home is on the same campus as a school. And that's how I got in touch with the principal of the school. Now, to help out, I have a little diagram here. I drew this all by myself. You can compliment me on it later. But see, I'm here on the left with stringy hair. And I knew a guy who knew a guy whose parents knew a guy who knew another guy. And that's how I got to India. It was one of those crazy God things of just one of those things that only he makes up, So I talked to the principal. He said, we'd love to have you come and teach in India. Do you have a teaching license? And I said, no, I don't. He said, well, we need a dance teacher. Can you teach dance? And this was just a beautiful God moment because I had been dancing since I was 3 years old. And it was just a beautiful God thing to where I was like, I do happen to know how to dance. And I remember actually having to stop dance when I got into college, and I remember talking to God, and I have been doing dance for 14, 15 years. What was the point of that? I don't know if you ever have driven your kids to after school extracurricular stuff for year on year on year, and you say what was the point of that when they end? And I was kind of at that. I was like, what was the point of that? And this was God going this was the point of that I had prepared you for mission work since you were 3 years old. You knew you wanted to be a missionary when you were 7 years old, and you didn't even get saved till you were 9 years old. So it was a beautiful orchestrated God thing. And I got to go to India. It was amazing. I got to teach this fun 5th grade class here on the left. And then I got to hang out with the kids from the children's home over on the right. And I spent 4 months in India, the end of 2022, coming on to 2023. It was just awesome. I had so much fun until they said, Katie, you are a fair American child. You cannot deal with the Indian summers. And so they sent me home because it was going to get too hot. And so just when mango season was coming on, they sent me home. I was like, ah. So they sent me home, and I got back, I think it was about April of 2023. I have to keep my years right. And once again, I was at a bit of a loss of what to do. Like, I had always dreamed of going to India, and I knew it wasn't quite right for me to go back yet, and I didn't know what to do. And so the same pastor said, hey, we're having a team from our church go to Kenya. Why don't you go with the team to Kenya, and maybe you'll like it there. And like my first reaction to that was like, really? Kenya? Like, I've always been called to the unreached people. I've always wanted to go to like the most remote places and just far out there as you can get. And I feel like people are texting me. Sorry about that. I felt like Kenya, like everybody goes to Kenya, right? Like when you hear about a missionary going to Africa, you think of like Kenya and Uganda, and I just was like, that's not quite right. But I went with the team, and I was proven wrong. I went with the team, and it was just obviously amazing because it's Kenya. So the team met a team that lives there, and the missionary there, and he took us to this Maasai tribe, just like out driving for hours and hours on like very sketchy roads, just with no guide rails whatsoever. It was pretty fun. And so our team went, and we built this church in the background here. I didn't, but some people were up on like these tall metal things welding together. It was very unsafe and not up to code. But it was so good and so amazing. And part of our team was doing a VBS at different schools. And it was so cool because we had like a few VBSs planned. And then suddenly different schools were learning about us being there. And like more and more and more were inviting us. So we only had a few planned. And then God had like so many more planned. It was awesome. So we got to share the gospel with so many kids there. And then we got to dedicate this brand new church with this brand new congregation. And it was just so cool and if you've ever been to like an African church service, it is just totally different than anything you've ever seen in the U.S. It was just awesome. And so after church, as the missionaries, we were giving out little, I don't even remember what they were. They were probably like little pieces of paper or something, like saying to come back. And this grandma came up with her grandbaby and just kind of put him in my arms. And it was just the cutest stinking thing. I like still can't get over that adorable face. It's just too cute. And then she took the necklace off of her neck and put it on mine, and it was just like so amazing. But one of the last days we were there, the missionary took us back to what he's been working on in the main city of Nairobi. So the capital city, he has a team there that works at a school. So they have this school for this huge population of refugees. So there's this, I believe there's 350,000 of these refugees living in the city, kind of in a section of the city where it's just a bunch of first and second generation refugees. And they're essentially an unreached people because they're coming from a Muslim nation. They're all Muslims, and so they're very much unreached with the gospel. So there's about 350,000 unreached people living in the main city of Nairobi, and the pastor there has a team that has a school. So they have an elementary school and a English school to teach English to the adults, and then have elementary for the kids, and then they have some health classes. And it was just such a, almost like a Moses moment. Remember when God told Moses to go free the Israelites, and he said, oh no, God, I can't do that. I can't speak. Like, I could never. And then he's like, that's okay, I have Aaron. And so I really felt like God, when he said, go to Kenya, and I was like, oh no, God, I can't possibly. Like, I always felt called to the unreached people. Like, they're not unreached. There, so many missionaries have gone. And he said, that's okay, I have 350,000 of them waiting there. And so I was so much more convinced at the end of that. And I just really thought it was so interesting that I leave you in suspense as I drink my water. that I've been around the world a lot. I got to go to Cambodia 3 times, which is in Southeast Asia, and I got to go to India for 4 months, and it's really interesting to see the different cultures of different countries, even on different continents, just like worlds apart. And yet, as I walked down the streets of Nairobi, I really felt like, wow, they look so similar. And God really spoke to me and was like, Katie, it's not just the one place where you're called, but you're called to my unreached people, and they look the same anywhere you go. That you could go to the streets of Nairobi, to the streets of Phnom Penh, Cambodia, to the streets of India, and the people will look the same because they're my lost people. And no matter how you're going to do that, you might have the culture differences, you might have the language differences, the way people look are different, but my lost people are the same. And God just like totally spoke to my heart and made me so much more passionate for Kenya. And now I'm headed back. I'm going to be working with the missionary there, working with the refugee population and the Muslim population. And I'm so excited, so much more convinced with God, and he totally switched my brain. And I'm going to be going there for a 1 to 2 year term as a missionary associate with Assemblies of God. And I am working now on going to different churches and raising money to be able to go there. And I have about it's $350 a month left to raise. So I have about 7 people willing to give $50 a month. And that's all I need to be able to go to Kenya and be able to live there and just really live my dream. That I was like 7 years old, and it's just a lifelong dream, and it's just so amazing. I'm so excited. All right. Oh, shoot. I missed that part. Oops. All right. So I mixed up with my words and my notes. All right. Why do I do missions? This was actually back in the beginning of 2024. Our team went to Cambodia again, and this was the 3rd time I had been to Cambodia. And this was actually, we made little gift bags because we did a banquet for these women that work the streets of getting my countries mixed up, of Cambodia. So we got to give these women a night off from working the streets, and we got to give them amazing food, and the men were there giving flowers out to these women, and we gave these like just little gift bags. And I thought it was such a beautiful, thing of oh, see, now I'm getting all my words mixed up. Okay. I thought it was such a beautiful image of kind of what Jesus did, right? Because I think a lot of times there are people in society that a lot of us don't really want to see, right? We don't want to see the people working on the streets, the people that live on the streets, the people that have like not good jobs or not fun things, and like just not stable families, and we don't like to see like the dark side of society, right? I think that like just a lot of us just don't like to see those kinds of things. But God and Jesus was never afraid to see the hard parts of people's lives. And so Jesus personally sought the people out. I remember in the Bible where he sought out the woman at the well, and he told her everything about her life, the good and the bad and the ugly. And he sought out Zacchaeus, who was the tax collector, like the lowest of the low that everybody hated. And he sought them out personally, individually, one by one. And like he sought me out when I was a kid, and he sought you out. And I'm sure you can think about like those individual times where he just ran after you, chasing you to come back. And I thought that like this image of this banquet, that we were supposed to individually seek these people out, just like Jesus did, just like he did for us. And that's really why I do missions, because he first sought me out and loved me, that I am supposed to then go and love my brothers and sisters also. And then I have another picture of these cute kids. Look at that. Aren't they adorable? I just can't. They're so stinking cute. But yeah, so I already got past that part. Okay, you can actually just go back to the first slide if you'd like, because I am going to switch. And do you mind if I share a bit of the Bible with you? Because the Bible is exceedingly more interesting than anything I do in my life. So I have to jump to it now. I started reading. It came up in my Bible reading, Psalms 37. And I'm not going to read the whole chapter today, but it's a really good chapter of the Bible. Psalms 37 is by David, and it's just so... I read it for the first day, and I don't know if you do this, but sometimes you read a chapter and you say, wow, that's a really good chapter of the Bible. And then you go back the next day and you're like, I'll read it again. And then the next day you're like, I'll read it again. And then God just starts speaking to you through this one chapter that you have read now like over and over and over again. But that's kind of what he did for me in this chapter. And he really, he kind of showed me David's life. You know, I think you can easily read through David's life, right? And maybe a short amount of time you can read through from when he was a child helping in his father's fields to when he was defeating Goliath, and then he became a soldier, and then he was running for his life for years, and then he became king, and then his own son wanted to usurp his throne and kicked him out of his own palace, and he was on the run again. And then I feel like it's easy to read through that, but oftentimes we as Christians kind of forget that this was years and years and years of a man's life. That this took years from when he was a child in his father's field to when he became king. And I think that we often forget in our lives that we want something as fast as we can read it in the Bible. That sometimes you read something in the Bible and said, wow, that was really cool what God did. I wish he'd do that in my life. And then you start feeling bad about not having those things in your life, those things that God has promised and the blessings of God, and you're just like, wow, why can't he go a little faster? And just waiting is such a hard time in our lives. And I think that I hear, I always say that there should be certain dangers that you don't say in the Christian world. Like God, could always need a little bit more patience. You just don't say that. No one says that. No one says, God, that was a great blessing, but I could have waited a little bit longer for it. No one says that. And I think that we as Christians often find ourselves in this waiting period with God. But I wanted to look into, what do we do in the waiting period? Do we just sit there waiting on God? Do we feel sad about ourselves, looking at everybody else who has their blessings first and we don't have ours? Are we just going to do the same old thing? Are we going to do what they did in, I think it was Acts, where they just all quit their jobs and just decided to just sit and wait for Jesus to come back? What do we do in the waiting period? And I wanted to look a little bit into what the devil says to us in the waiting period, what we say to us in the waiting period, and then what God says to us in the waiting period. All right. I think the first thing, I'm going to jump to what the devil says to us. The first thing that he says to us, or what he tries to do, is he tries to separate us. He tries to separate us from our brothers and sisters in Christ, and he says that only you understand what's going on. No one else has ever been through this, and they just don't understand. They don't understand what you're going through. They don't understand what's happening in your life. They just wouldn't get it. So just don't talk about it. And then he tries to separate us from God. He makes us try to forget all those things where God has been faithful in the past. All those Bible stories where God has come through. All the things that you've seen in other people's lives where God has come through again and again. He tries to make you forget those things. And he tries to make you forget, and he tries to separate you from the herd, right? And it says in the Bible where he tries, the vicious lion tries to separate the sheep from its herd so that it can easily devour one. And so the next thing he tries to do is he tries to whisper in your ear, right? And oftentimes he gets you late at night, right? When you're already tired, you're already run down from the day. if you've ever had like multiple days where you're just not having good sleep, he gets you at the end of that and he starts whispering in your ear. And he starts saying things like, will God really give you that blessing? Is he really someone that's going to give you that blessing? Maybe some other people have gotten their blessings, but maybe it's just coincidence. Will you ever really get yours? And at this, he kind of tries to make us doubt God's character, right? Is God really someone that would give you a blessing or a promise? And I wanted to kind of see what Jesus says about his own character. In Matthew 7, Jesus talks about being a good father, where he says that I would never give you a stone if you asked for a fish, or a scorpion if you asked for bread. I might be mixing that up. But he says that I'm a good father, and I know how to give good gifts. That even the fathers of this world give good gifts to their children. I am so much higher than that, and I will give good gifts to my children. But the next thing you want to do to fight against this lie is to look at your brothers and sisters and ask them. As the devil tries to separate you from your brothers and sisters, that's when you want to go up, you want to come back to them. And you ask, when has God ever abandoned you in your life? When has God ever promised you something, said he was going to give you a blessing, and then just left it there? But I also want you to look at the Bible and look when God ever abandoned his people. Abandoned and started a story, was giving you the blessing, they went through a hardship, and then the story just ended. No, God always gives an ending to the story. He's a finisher. He's the great author. And so we come to Revelations 12:11 that says, see, I have a high-tech phone. Revelations 12:11 says, and they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. So we overcome by the blood of the Lamb, by Jesus himself and his own words, and the word of the testimony of our brothers and sisters, not only in this life, but also in the Bible, their testimony is there. But David also addresses this in Psalms 37. See, now we're coming back to Psalms 37. And he says in verse 25 and 28, I have been young and now am old, yet I have never seen the righteous forsaken or his children begging for bread. For the Lord loves justice. He will not forsake his saints. They are preserved forever, but the children of the wicked shall be cut off. And then 34 says, wait for the Lord and keep his way, and he will exalt you to inherit the land, and you will look on when the wicked are cut off. And so the next thing that the devil tries to say is that really what God said to you? Now this is kind of the oldest trick in the book, right? Where he says, are you sure that that's what God said? Are you sure that that it was that blessing that he promised you? Are you sure that it wasn't just the burrito you ate last night and that's what's talking to you right now? Are you sure you're not just one of those crazy Christians that are just making up things in their heads? Are you sure that's really what God said to you? Now, I'm not sure exactly what God says to you precisely, but I do know what God says about and promises his children in the Bible and to us today. So we as Christ followers, as Paul says, we are heirs to God and co-heirs with Christ. And in Revelations 21, verse 4 through 7, I jump around a bit, I'm sorry. It says that eventually we as Christians will have this promise, that he will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore, for the former things have passed away. And he who was seated on the throne said, behold, I am making all things new. And he said, write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. And he said to me, it is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give from the spring of the water of life without payment. To the one who conquers will have this heritage. I will be his God, and he will be my son. So we are promised this sort of paradise, right? as Christians, eventually we will have the land that there are no tears and there's no pain and no death, and that we will be heirs of God, that we will be sons of God and co-heirs with Christ. And David says in Psalms 37, verse 4, he says to delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. And you might be saying, Katie, that's great. I love that someday when I die, I will have paradise, and I will have all these things, but what about me today? Like, sometimes that always seems so far away, right? But what does God promise me today, in the next year, in the next few years? And I'm still in the waiting period. Like, that doesn't really help, right? I think that it's important to remember that even in this world, God often does things more than what we had in mind. God often goes farther than what we had thought. You know, my favorite verse in the Bible is in Habakkuk. And I think it's 1, let me jump to it. 1 verse 5. See, I didn't have that saved. He says, look at the nations and watch and be utterly amazed. For I am going to do something in your day that you would not believe even if you were told. He says that even if I was going to tell you what's going to happen, you wouldn't even believe me because I'm going to do something so crazy. And so oftentimes he does this in a Christian's life. That we had this in mind, and then he has this in mind. That sometimes all we think about is the one country. Sometimes all I think about is India. And he says, no, I have so much different planned. There's going to be so much bigger, so much farther. And we actually see this multiple times in the Bible, where David's own son Solomon got this moment with God where he was like, God said, what do you want? I'll give you anything you want in the world. Ask, and I will give it to you. And this is kind of a genie in the bottle situation, right? Like, he could be asking for anything here, right? He could be asking for more wishes. He could be asking for, like, unlimited money. He could be asking to finally eat pork. Like, bacon is amazing. He could be asking for that. He could be asking for the land. And yet, he comes to this moment and he says, God, I'm now king of this huge kingdom. And, I mean, it's so hard to fill those shoes that my father David left. I just want to lead your people with wisdom. And God was so pleased at that. He said, I'm going to give you all those other things you didn't ask for, except for the bacon part. He didn't give him bacon. But he says, I'm going to give you the land. I'm going to give you the wisdom. I'm going to give you the riches. And to this day, Solomon was known as one of the richest men to ever walk this earth. But also, we see in Hannah's life, right? That she said, all I want is a son. That even if you give me a son, I will give him back to you. And not only did God give her one of the most well-known people in the Old Testament, he gave her Samuel, but he also gave her 6 more children after him. That she didn't just stop with the blessing that she asked for with the Samuel, or with wisdom. He went so much farther than what they had in mind. And so the next thing is what you might do in the waiting period. And something that's quite dangerous is that you might look to your left and to your right, and you might say, wow, you know, all those other people are getting their blessings before me. And suddenly, other people are getting their promotions before you. Other people are getting their new cars, their new things, and other people, all your friends are getting married and having kids, and you're just sitting there waiting for your blessings from God. And it's hard, but you might become jealous of those people, right? That so-and-so's gotten their blessing way before me, and I'm still just sitting here. And this is when the devil tries to come to you, and he says, I'll give you your blessing early. I could give it to you now. And we see this actually most famously in Jesus himself. That when the devil is tempting him in the wilderness, he takes him up on the temple, and he shows them, or maybe it's a hill. Is it the hill or a temple? Needless to say, he shows them the world, and he says, I could give it to you. I rule the world. I could give it to you right now. if you bow down and worship me. Now Jesus becomes, he gets all the world anyway, right? Like at the end of the days, he gets a new heaven and a new earth. But the devil is saying, I'll give it to you early. I'll give you your blessing early. All you have to do is do it the way I want you to do it. And Jesus, of course, said quoted the Bible to him and was like, no, I will not go against my Father's wishes. And we actually see this in David's life as well. We actually see this twice in David's life. When there was this one day when he was running from Saul, and him and his band of misfits are kind of hiding in this cave, right? Waiting for Saul and his army to go past where they're staying. And suddenly, Saul comes into the cave where they're hiding. And everybody's like freaking out, like, oh my gosh, it's just Saul all by himself. He's going in to go to the bathroom. And suddenly, David's faced with this dilemma where all his people are like, you could kill him right now. Get this over with. We can get back to our lives. We can go and you could be king. Like, he had every right to kill Saul in this moment. He had the love of the people, of the Israelites, where everybody said, yeah, Saul kills thousands, but David kills 10,000s. And he had the love of Saul's own family, where he was married to his daughter and he was best friends with his son. And his son, who was supposed to become king, said, you will rule and I will be next to you. He said, you can be king. And so he had every right to kill Saul. He was being hunted by Saul. And yet he said, I will not put my hand against God's anointed. I refuse to go against what God has planned. And this actually happened again when David and his commanders snuck down into Saul's camp, and Saul was sleeping there, and he was standing over him, and in that moment, he could kill him. Be done and over with it. He could stop eating what I'm sure is gross food just found in the wilderness. He could go back to his family, go back to his home. Everybody could live on with their lives. And yet he said, I will not put my hand against God's anointed. I refuse to go against what God has planned. But I think it's always interesting to kind of have that what if, right? What if David would have killed Saul in that moment? What if that would have happened? And we actually kind of almost get a what if glimpse in Sarah and Abraham's life, where Sarah and Abraham were waiting for a son for many, many years, and Sarah was just done. Like, she was over it. She was just frustrated with God and done with waiting for God. And so she was going to take things into her own hands. She gave Abraham Hagar, and out of it came Ishmael. And so Sarah had had done things her own way, right? She had gone against what God had planned, and Ishmael was also a great nation, but he was a cursed nation, where his hand was always against his brother, and he was a wild man. And so she still got the blessing at the end, which was so much better than what she had in mind. But she had gone against what God had planned. Which kind of brings me to another thing that, I don't know about you, but I say this a lot. I say, oh shoot, what if I mess this up? What if I mess up what God has in my life? What if I say something stupid, do something stupid, and the whole thing is just tipped upside down, ruined, and I am just done? What if I say something stupid to a pastor and they just like hate me forever? What if I go and say something silly, and what if I trip while walking on stage and it's just all ruined and then all done? But like it's an honest question. What if I mess this whole Jesus thing up? What if I mess up my whole Christian life? Well, actually, David messed up his whole Christian life. David had become king, and he stole a man's wife and killed him for it. He didn't kill the man himself, but he sent him and had other people kill him for him. That he had just messed up hugely. That thousands of years later, we as Christians later can read about this huge mess up in this man's life. You could say that he messed up royally. Oh, I was waiting for a laugh. That's okay. He messed up huge. And he had this moment of like, wow, I messed up. When God had brought a prophet to tell him, hey, you messed up. And yet, David was known as a man after God's own heart. That even though he had these huge mess-ups in his life, that God didn't condone those things. He didn't want him to do those things. And he still had to pay the consequences of those actions. But God still worked in his life. That God, even though Sarah messed up hugely, God still gave her Isaac. That even when all these things have messed up and we've flipped our lives upside down, ruined it, and mixed up all the things that God had planned, he still works through it. That Moses was a murderer, and yet he was still meant to lead God's people out of the Egyptian, Peter had denied Christ, and yet Jesus still called him the rock on which I will build my church. Throughout the Bible, God builds his church and his people, his great plan on the messed up people of the world. He sought out the messed up people of the world, and he planned accordingly. I was telling my mama about this sermon, and she said, yeah. She says, God takes into account our stupid. That he plans accordingly. And if you know a good mama, she knows you're going to get snackish on the road, and she brings fruit snacks. And she knows you're going to hate the fruit snacks, so she brought fishy crackers also. And she knows you're going to make a huge mess. She's planned accordingly. She brought baby wipes. And this is kind of what God does. He plans accordingly. He knows you're going to make big mess ups in your life. He knows you're going to just ruin entire circumstances, and he's planned accordingly. And that's just so amazing because, if we had to deal with all the huge mess ups without God. But one of the things I noticed in David's life when I was studying Psalms 37, and just David's life in general, I think that if we look at the Psalms, a lot of times David's known as an up and down sort of guy, right? That he's having like the best day ever and then the worst day ever, and then the best day ever and then the worst day ever. If you read through the Psalms, you can see this like very emotional man of just like having this roller coaster. But I thought it was so beautiful that in the worst moments of David's life, he worshiped God. I think it's Psalms 3, where his own son is trying to kill him and usurp his throne. That like, if any time in David's life he could be mad at God, I would kind of get if he was mad at God in this moment. Like, I would be mad at God in this moment, I'm sure. But he didn't. He said, I'm sure you have a plan, God. I know you know what you're doing, and I worship you because of it. And this is what I feel like we're called to do as Christians. That even in the hardest waiting moments of our lives, even in the lowest parts of our lives, that we are told to worship God through it. And another thing I think that we're called to do as Christians, jumping into what God asks us to do in the waiting period, he asks us to sacrifice the blessing and the promises back to him. And we see this obviously with Abraham and Isaac, where he asks us to sacrifice the promise back to him. That Abraham was, I think, 100 years old when they finally got Isaac. He had waited so long for this promised one that was going to bless the world, and all the countries would be blessed by his descendants. And yet God says, will you sacrifice him back to me? And there was this time where Abraham was taking like a few days to climb up this mountain with his son Isaac. And I'm sure he was thinking, my wife's going to kill me. This one son, this one thing, and she's totally going to kill me. Like, I'm going to be sleeping on the couch forever after this. Like, I'm never going to get past this. Yeah, just coming home. Yeah, so Sarah, I lost the kid. Like, freak out moment. He's never going to get past this. And he even has this moment where Isaac turns to him and he says, Dad, I see the wood, I see the fire, but where's the sacrifice? It's a heart-wrenching moment. And Abraham says God will provide. But I think God asks us to sacrifice those things back to him. That even though he gave those promises to us, even though he gave those blessings to us, he asks us to give it back to him. And in this, we have to trust God in how the things are going to be fulfilled. that it might not turn out the way we had planned, but it surely will turn out the way God had planned. And we have to trust God in the timing. You have to trust him for the timing, and that's so hard. It'll come when he says it's going to come. And I think that this mindset takes our focus off of the blessing and puts it back on the blesser. And we begin to live our lives to receive more of the Creator and less of the created. That our eyes are focused on him and not what he can give us. And so our heart's desire begins to align with God's, in where when David says, if you delight yourself in the Lord, he will give you the desires of your heart. He will give you the desires of what his heart is for you. And so I wanted to end with reading a couple more verses. I have Galatians 6:9 and 2 Timothy 4:7-8. Let's do 2 Timothy first. All right, 4:7-8. I think this is Paul talking, and he says, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Henceforth, there will be laid up for me the crown of righteousness, with which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award me on that day. And not only to me, but also to all who have loved his appearing. Paul is saying, I have lived a life. I have fought the good fight. I have run the race. And now I will get those blessings from God. And in Galatians 6:9, it says, and let us not grow weary for doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. That this is what we're called to do as Christians. We're called to run the race and fight the fight and reap the harvest and not give up. That I want to encourage you that no matter what, we do win the war. We will get the promises of God if we do not give up. So that's all I have. I have a bit of a tradition when I come to churches. To end it out, I remember what Jesus says to his disciples in Acts. He says that to go out and go to a town and knock on a door, and if they let you into their home, to let the presence of God rest on that home. And so I want to pray a blessing over you guys and let the presence of God rest on you. Because you were so kind in letting me come and speak and so kind to welcome me into your home, that I want to pray a blessing over you. And then, do you want me to close, or do you want to give it back to you? Okay. All right, let's pray. Dear God, thank you so much, Lord. Thank you for these people. Thank you for their blessing to the church, God. I pray your immense blessing over them, Lord. I pray that they will live every day of their life, Lord, to seek more of you. And Lord, I pray that you bless them abundantly, Lord, that anyone who drives by, who walks by, will see and say, surely these people are blessed by God. Surely they have the presence of God resting on them. And Lord, I pray that people were able to recognize them out in public as blessed people, as Christians, as loving followers of you, Lord. I pray that they're able to point people out and say, surely you have been with Christ. Lord, I pray this over them in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Katie. My apologies for calling you Catherine. Let's gather around and pray for Katie. She's got a 4-hour drive ahead of her. And so let's ask the Lord to be with her as she goes to Kenya, and let's ask for the Lord's protection. So let's just gather around and pray, if that's okay.
Yeah,